Okay, so this video is going to be a slope review, or a review about slope in general. And if you remember back from like junior high, you were always told that slope was rise over run. And I kind of reject that as the definition of slope. But if you think about rise, rise is your vertical change. So how we change on my y-axis. So it's going to be my change in y. And the run is your horizontal change, so it's going to be your change in x. And we can refer to that, and you should be referring to that as more of like your delta y over your delta of x, which refers to the change in y over your change in x. And if you think about change, like when you go to the store, change is just subtraction. So the change in y is where we subtract our y's, and the change in x is where we subtract our x. And this is how we talk about slope, is when we do y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And this is how we're going to represent our slope. Now, when we're given a graph, like you see up here, I have 3 graphs. We're going to look at our slopes, and we're going to look at my vertical change over the horizontal change. So I'm going to look at this first one. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so that we can see it better. Okay, so my first graph, we're going to look at the vertical change over the horizontal change. And all we're going to do is count. So we're going to count up, and we're going to say 1, 2, 3. So my vertical change is 3, and then we're going to count over 1, 2, 3, 4. Now over is not a very good term, so we went to the right 4. Because we went to the right 4, we know that this is a positive 4 and a positive 3, because we went up, which is positive, to the right, which is positive, so my slope is 3 over 4. Looking at my second graph here, I'm still going to do the same thing. I'm going to look at my vertical change over my horizontal change. So my vertical change goes down. So down is going to be negative, and I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So negative 8. And I'm still going to the right. The right is positive. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So negative 8. Over a positive 4. Now I can reduce that slope, and if I can reduce a slope, I'm always going to reduce that. So negative 8 over 4 reduces to a negative 2. So the slope in this one is negative 2. Okay, so the vertical change here, if you notice, there is no vertical change whatsoever. So the vertical change is 0, and the horizontal change is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 over 8. But 0 over 8 is going to be 0. Every horizontal line always has a slope of 0 because there's never a vertical change. And if there's not a change in y, then my numerator is 0. And when I divide 0 by a number, my answer is always going to be 0. Usually we're not given the graph to find the slope. We're given 2 points. When we're given 2 points, we're going to use the formula, which has my change in y over my change in x. So I'm going to subtract my 2 y's, and I'm going to subtract my 2 x's. Now, I'm just going to tell you, it says x2 minus x1 and y2 minus y1. It doesn't matter which point you consider your first point and which point you consider your second point, but I am going to label them because what matters is that my x1 and my y1 come from the same point, and my x2 and my y2 come from the same point. And because I don't want to mix them up, I'm going to label them so that I don't get them mixed up. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Notice my 2 negatives here. That's because the first minus comes from the formula, and the second negative symbol comes because this is a negative 9. Now I'm going to simplify. Negative 3 minus 7 is negative 10. 2 negatives make a positive, so negative 5 plus 9 gives me a positive 4. I can reduce that to negative 5 over 2. So that would be the slope of this particular problem. Okay, this has 2, -1, and -7, -4. I'm going to do the same thing like before. I'm going to label it x1, y1, and x2, y2. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Two negatives are going to make that positive. So I have -4 plus 1, so that's -3. -7 minus 2 gives me a -9. I'm going to reduce that. Two negatives make a positive, and 3 over 9 gives me 1/3. Okay, my last example is -13, -5, and -1, 3. I'm still going to label my points as x1, y1, x2, y2. So I'm going to do 3, my y2 minus my y1, which is -5, over -1 minus a -13. My two negatives are still going to make a positive because they're right next to each other. So 3 plus 5 is 8. Two negatives are going to make a positive. So -1 plus 13 is 12. I can reduce 8 over 12 because they're both divisible by 4, so I get 2 over 3. So this is just a quick review of slope and how to find slope from either the graph or using the equation.